Hi there. My name's Vanessa Parker, and this isn't the kind of story I ever thought I'd tell. I'm not famous. I'm not flashy. I'm just a woman who worked hard, paid her dues, and finally found a little slice of peace in a quiet neighborhood where I thought no one would bother me. But sometimes life has other plans. This story isn't about revenge. It's not even about anger. It's about respect. And what happens when people forget that respect isn't something you give based on looks, status, or how loud someone is. It's something you give because we all deserve it, especially when we've worked a lifetime just to earn a little peace. So if you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever had to bite your tongue or let something slide just to keep the peace, then this one's for you. I've been there. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see a little of yourself in what happened next. Let me take you back to where it all began. I didn't move here for company. I moved here for quiet. After 30 years of working in industrial kitchens, heat, noise, and long nights, I finally hung up the apron. My name is Vanessa Parker, 44 years old, big-boned and proud of it. Retired early with sore knees, two cats named Marvin and Luther, and a pit bull named Rosie who guards me like I'm made of gold. I'm not rich, but I worked hard for everything I have. And this house, this little one-story home on the edge of a sleepy neighborhood, was supposed to be my reward. Every morning starts the same. I rise before the sun, feed the boys their tuna, pour myself a mug of chicory coffee, and step onto the porch. The world still sleeps while I breathe in the damp, cool air. There's a peace in that quiet hour that I don't take for granted. I work too long, listening to clanging pans and yelling sous chefs, not to savor every second of silence now. I keep my lawn trimmed just enough to show I care, but not so much that I invite small talk. I plant tomatoes in the spring, collard greens in the fall, and I always have fresh herbs on my windowsill. This house may not be much to some folks, but to me, it's a sanctuary, a place where nobody questions my presence, where I don't owe anyone an explanation, or so I thought. It started small. Little things that folks might overlook. A white SUV idling too close to my driveway. A woman, maybe in her late 30s, bleach blonde hair, always on her phone, parking just barely on the edge of my property. I told myself it was a mistake, that maybe she didn't know where my boundary line ended. But the second time, that wasn't ignorance. That was assumption. She never looked my way even when I stood on the porch. I waved once. She didn't wave back, just got out of her car, stilettos clicking, hair bouncing, like she owned every inch of the street. I watched her walk to the house 3 doors down. New neighbor. Hadn't seen her move in, but I noticed her presence now. That car of hers, white, polished, loud, started showing up more and more, and always halfway across my driveway. Not enough to block me in, but just enough to say, I don't care. That kind of almost disrespect. Subtle, but sharp. At first I let it slide. I'm not one for fuss. I've lived long enough to know some battles aren't worth the energy. But it wasn't just the car. It was how she wouldn't meet my eyes. How she tossed her trash into my bin one Tuesday like it was hers. How she once rolled her eyes when I asked her kindly to scoot her vehicle back a bit so I could mow the edge. It was like I was invisible, or worse, irrelevant. And let me tell you something. A woman like me, who spent her whole life being seen only when she was needed, learns how to recognize when she's being disregarded. It's not always about words. Sometimes disrespect wears perfume and smiles while it tramples your space. So I started keeping notes. Not out of anger, yet, but out of a quiet resolve. Because I'd built this piece. This little corner of the world was mine. And I wasn't going to let someone chip away at it just because they didn't think I'd push back. Not yet. But the day would come. I honked twice, short, polite. She didn't come out. I had to park 2 houses down and carry my groceries in shifts. My hip was already acting up from the weather turning. I saw her standing by her mailbox later that afternoon, chatting away on her phone, one arm waving like she was directing traffic. I walked up slowly, keeping my tone even. "Excuse me," I said. "I think your car might have blocked my driveway this morning. I had to walk all the way from the Johnsons. Just wanted to make sure you knew." She looked me up and down, sunglasses still on, and gave a little smirk. "Oh? I was only there for a minute. You weren't even home. I blinked. I was gone 10 minutes. You were parked there when I came back. Well, next time just leave a note or something, she said, brushing her hair behind her ear like I was the one being rude. I'm saying it to you now, I replied calmly. Out of courtesy. She shrugged, already turning back toward her house. That was the first time I felt it. The sting. Not just of being brushed off, but of being dismissed entirely. Like my space didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. From then on, it escalated in small ways. Always small. Somehow her trash started showing up in my bin again, even after I taped a note inside the lid that read, "Private use only." I'd find her coffee cups tossed under my bushes. Once, she pulled into my driveway just to make a U-turn while I was watering my garden. Didn't even wave, just backed out and drove off. I mentioned it to the HOA president. He gave me that tight smile that says, "We'll look into it." But we both knew they wouldn't. Not for someone like me. Not for someone like her. Still, I tried to keep my grace. Every time I wanted to say something, I asked myself, what would Mama do? Mama raised me on gospel and grit. Never let them say you lost your dignity, she'd whisper. So instead of yelling, I kept records. I wrote down the dates, took photos, even installed a cheap motion camera aimed at my drive. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because something told me this wasn't over. Not yet. One morning I found tire marks in my flower bed. That was the first time my hands trembled. She'd cut across the corner of my lawn to beat traffic. My zinnias flattened. My lavender stalks bent and broken. Rosie, my dog, sat by the damage with her ears low, as if she knew something had been violated. That day I didn't knock on her door. I didn't leave a note. I just stood by my porch for a long time, watching her SUV in her driveway, glinting in the sun like it was proud. I thought about all the times I'd been told to just let it go. How many times in my life I'd chosen quiet over conflict. How many times women like me, older, heavier, darker, had to bite our tongues so no one would call us angry. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was tired. Tired of being kind and getting walked on. Tired of giving the benefit of the doubt to people who didn't give me a second glance. I walked back inside, fed Marvin and Luther, and opened the notebook I kept by the kitchen counter. I wrote in big letters, "Enough." Then I circled it. That's when the planning began. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with yelling or knocking. Sometimes it starts with a whisper, with quiet hands, with the decision to stop shrinking just to make others comfortable. It happened on a Wednesday morning, one of those muggy, unsettled days when you can smell the rain in the air before it even falls. Rosie wasn't herself. She hadn't touched her kibble. Her breathing was shallow and her eyes had that dull glaze that told me something was wrong. I knew that look. I'd seen it in old kitchen hands when the exhaustion got to them. But this was my Rosie, my protector, my girl. I called the vet, heart pounding, and they told me to bring her in now. No time to waste. I slipped on my sandals, grabbed her leash, and opened the door. She followed, limping slightly, tail tucked, trusting me to fix what was broken. And there it was, the SUV, parked dead across my driveway, nose in the bushes, like it had been thrown there. The bleach blonde had done it again, only this time, she hadn't just been thoughtless. She'd blocked my way in a moment when minutes mattered. I stood there for a second, stunned. Then I jogged across the street, leash in one hand, phone in the other, and pounded on her door. No answer. I rang the bell twice. Nothing. I could feel the sweat prickling along my back. Rosie was whining now, pacing in circles. I looked down the street. Every other house was quiet. The sun was rising just above the trees, casting long shadows across the road, like fingers reaching for something out of place. I called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation. They said they'd send someone, but they couldn't tow without a formal complaint. That'd take hours. I hung up, and then I just stood there, staring at that car, feeling something inside me shift. It wasn't yelling that rose in my chest. It wasn't a scream. It was silence. Cold, precise silence. Like a thread had snapped cleanly. I took Rosie back inside and called for a rideshare to the vet. She'd be okay. They said I brought her in just in time. But that SUV, that woman, It had crossed the final line. When I got home, I didn't rest. I went straight to the garage. You see, people underestimate women like me. They think size means slow. That age means soft. But I didn't spend 30 years running commercial kitchens without learning a thing or two about mechanics, water pressure, and systems built to last. In the far corner of my garage sat my pride and joy, a high-powered irrigation system I'd installed myself to water the back vegetable beds during drought months. It had 3 adjustable heads and pressure nozzles strong enough to rinse mildew off concrete. I'd affectionately called it the baptizer when I first tested it. It took me an hour to reroute one of the spray heads. I aligned it just right with the edge of my driveway, connected the trigger to a motion sensor I still had from a holiday light project last year. I even added a second sensor to catch movement from both sides. When I was done, I sat back on my heels and looked at the setup. Simple, quiet, legal, and devastating. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I made a fresh batch of coffee, fed the cats, and waited. Sure enough, 8:13 a.m., there she came, cruising down the road like she owned the pavement. She didn't even slow down as she swung into my driveway, phone glued to her ear. The moment her tires crossed the sensor, whoosh! 3 jets of freezing water blasted out from the edge of my yard like a surprise hurricane. Hit the windshield, the driver's side door, the side mirror. The SUV rocked to a stop. There was screaming. There was flailing. The door flung open, and she stepped out in platform heels and a pastel dress, soaked from head to toe. I sipped my coffee and stepped out onto the porch. "Morning," I said, calm as can be. She stared at me, dripping, stunned. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked. "Just part of my new automatic rinse system," I said, "to keep the driveway clean. Can't be too careful." "You set this up on purpose. That's assault." I tilted my head. "Only comes on when someone crosses my property line. You might want to be careful next time." She stormed off, fuming, leaving a trail of water behind her. I didn't gloat. I didn't post it online. I just went back inside and marked the day in my notebook. She won't park here again. Because sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom or a confrontation. Sometimes all it takes is knowing exactly how to use what you've built to protect what's yours. I hadn't meant for the world to see it. Honestly, I set up the camera for peace of mind. A little security, a little proof, just in case someone tried to twist the story. But I forgot that my niece Deja had synced the garage cam to our shared cloud drive months ago. So when she came over that evening to bring me fresh biscuits and saw the footage, well, things took on a life of their own. "It was the scream that got her," she said. The neighbor's shriek as that cold blast of water hit her mid-sentence. The frantic exit, soaked hair flapping in the breeze, heels slipping on my wet driveway. The way I just stood there, cool as iced tea, in my housecoat and slippers, nodding like a judge handing down a verdict. "She messed with the wrong auntie," Deja laughed, wheezing. "Aunt V, this needs to be seen." I didn't think much of it when she asked to clip a snippet for her TikTok. "Sure," I told her. "Just blur the license plate." I figured maybe a few friends would chuckle, maybe leave a comment or two. By the next morning, it had over 200,000 views. By the end of the week, it was on the front page of Reddit under Orjar Justice Served, and even got a shout-out from a popular podcaster. I've never seen someone enforce a boundary with so much grace, humor, and engineering genius. I wasn't used to attention. I still had trouble figuring out how to work voice text. But suddenly I had strangers messaging me things like, "You're a legend, Queen," and "Teach me your ways." Deja started calling me Driveway Avenger. I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first, but then the letters started coming. One woman from Georgia wrote, "My neighbor's son keeps blocking my walkway. I've been too afraid to speak up. Watching you reminded me that I can say something." Another said, "Thank you for showing that we can stand up for ourselves without yelling or fighting. You gave me courage." It was humbling and a little funny. All I did was spray water on a car. But I guess people are so used to noise and chaos that quiet defiance stands out. As for my neighbor, she went silent. Not another word, not another glance. Her SUV hasn't touched my property since. She parks neatly in her own driveway now, careful as a cat. One morning, I even saw her take the long way around the cul-de-sac just to avoid passing in front of my house. I didn't smile, but I did nod. That's the thing about respect. It's not always granted with titles or years. Sometimes it's earned the old-fashioned way, by drawing a line and standing still when someone tries to cross it. A few weeks later, I got a knock on the door. It was Mr. Bouchard, the HOA president. I braced myself for a complaint, but instead, he handed me a folded letter and said, "Vanessa, on behalf of the board, thank you." Turns out a few other neighbors had experienced similar small slights from the woman in question, but they hadn't known how to push back without drama. My little irrigation stunt had shown them a path, firm, funny, and fair. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Vindication doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's a quiet nod from someone who once overlooked you. Sometimes it's the mailman who now waves instead of ignoring you. Or the teenager from next door who stops to ask how your tomatoes are doing. Even Rosie, sweet girl, seemed to walk with a little more pride when we strolled past the neighbor's house. Like she knew we'd reclaim something important. Not just a driveway, but the right to exist fully and peacefully in our own space. I didn't become a hero. I didn't want to. But I did become someone who reminded people, especially women like me, that being overlooked doesn't mean being powerless. That dignity doesn't have to shout to be heard. That sometimes the smallest act of resistance can ripple farther than you ever imagined. And just between us, I kept the sprinkler system, just in case. I sit on my porch most evenings now, a cup of tea in hand. Rosie curled up at my feet, the world quiet again. The driveway's clean, the neighborhood's calm. No more screeching tires or sideways glances. Just the sound of cicadas, the hum of streetlights, and the soft rhythm of a life I've built with care. It's funny, isn't it? The things we let slide over the years, all those small moments when someone steps on your piece and you tell yourself it's not worth it. But the truth is, sometimes it is. I didn't spray that car because I wanted revenge. I did it because dignity matters. Because at a certain age, you stop apologizing for needing space. You stop shrinking to keep others comfortable. You stop letting people treat your silence like permission. And no, I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't make a scene. I just stood tall, in my own way. That's the kind of legacy I want to leave. Not noise, not conflict, but quiet strength. A message for every woman who's ever been told she was too loud, too much, or not worth seeing. You are not invisible. You never were. So if you're reading this and feeling like someone's been parking their assumptions in your life, let me tell you, set your boundaries. Water your garden, install your sprinkler system if you must, but don't let them steal your peace. Stand up, not just for yourself, but for the version of you that used to whisper, "Maybe next time I'll speak." Let this be your next time. And when the world finally sees you for all that you are, don't gloat. Just smile, sip your tea, and enjoy your porch. You've earned it. In a world that often overlooks quiet strength, Vanessa's story is a reminder that dignity doesn't have to raise its voice to be heard. Through small acts of courage and grace, she showed us that boundaries are not about conflict. They are about self-respect. This is more than just a tale of one woman and her driveway. It's about every Black woman who has ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told to calm down when all she wanted was to be seen and respected. It's about the power of touching stories that reveal how personal peace is worth protecting. About those emotional stories we carry in silence until one day we decide we've had enough. And it's not just about standing up. It's about how we stand up, with thoughtfulness, creativity, and calm determination. Vanessa didn't yell, she didn't fight, she planned, she protected. And in doing so, she reminded us that being firm doesn't mean being unkind. This is what Unraveled Fates is about. Stories that untangle the quiet threads of injustice and reshape them into something stronger, into hope, into action. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Let others know that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful narrated stories are the ones that unfold slowly, like a sunrise on a quiet porch. You never know who might need to hear it. Let's keep these touching stories alive. Let's lift up the voices of Black women who stand their ground, not for applause, but for peace. Because every time we share, we plant a seed of change, and together we grow something stronger. Vanessa Parker's story delivers a powerful set of educational messages that resonate deeply with older American audiences, especially those who've spent a lifetime building peace only to have it challenged by the subtle, persistent disrespect of others. On the surface, it may seem like a quiet tale of neighborly conflict, but beneath that lies a profound lesson in dignity, boundaries, resilience, and the art of aging with grace and power. One of the most important educational themes is the distinction between peace and passivity. Vanessa teaches us that choosing not to escalate doesn't mean surrendering one's space or self-worth. Her decision to set boundaries, first through documentation, then through creative action, demonstrates how we can uphold our dignity without resorting to confrontation. This is particularly relevant for older adults who often navigate assumptions that age softens, resolve, or limits voice. The story also educates audiences on the subtle forms of modern disrespect, from body language and avoidance to microaggressions masked as misunderstandings. Vanessa's awareness and her refusal to dismiss these moments reflect a lifetime of experience in recognizing the difference between accidental oversight and intentional disregard. This empowers older viewers, especially Black women, to trust their instincts and stand firm when others try to erase or belittle their presence. Another core lesson is in intergenerational empowerment. Vanessa's niece Deja amplifies her aunt's story in a modern medium, social media, bridging the gap between traditional values and new platforms for justice. It reminds older audiences that their voices still matter and can inspire across age groups when shared authentically. Importantly, the narrative also models nonviolent, intelligent resistance. Vanessa doesn't lash out. She observes, she plans, and she responds with quiet brilliance. Her sprinkler system isn't just a practical solution. It's a metaphor for controlled, effective pushback. It shows that wisdom and creativity often speak louder than anger, and that asserting oneself doesn't require shouting. This lesson in strategic self-advocacy is especially valuable for seniors, many of whom were raised to keep the peace at the cost of their comfort. Lastly, the story reinforces the value of community respect and earned presence. Vanessa doesn't demand attention. She lives with integrity, gardens her land, and nurtures her peace. When she stands up, it's not to prove herself. It's to defend what she's already built. That, in itself, is a lesson in legacy. How to grow older without growing invisible. In a culture that often glorifies youth and loud voices, Vanessa's story is a gentle but powerful education in graceful aging, self-worth, and the quiet strength of a woman who's had enough. It reminds us all, no matter our age, that respect is not a privilege to be begged for, but a right to be expected, protected, and passed down.